Good afternoon. It's Brother Andy here checking in with you guys today. And I'm Missionary Servants of the Word. Yes, Missionary Servants of the Word. So today we're going to talk about St. Agustin, who he was and how his conversion started, where he came from and why everyone talks about him. He made this famous books, the Confessions, his confessions of all the sins he did. And today we're going to get the information by Saint for now. So, what is a saint? There's going to be a picture right here, and it's this snare, on top of his head, the person's head, but he has that halo, and saying like this, like God gives me the power. I believe in God and nothing. I'm not going to be in the snares. This one of the psalms we pray goes, He will free me from the snare of the devil. So. A saint, what is a saint? A saint with a capital S is one of those persons recognized by the church as having, by holiness of life, a heroic virtue, attained a high place in heaven, and as being therefore entitled to the veneration of the faithful, fit to serve them as a spiritual model, and able to intercede for them in the courts of God. A spiritual model and being able to intercede, because they were able to get to the holiness. So how are they not going to intercede for us, right? How are they not going to intercede? But a saint is someone who picks himself up after they have fallen. A saint who keeps on persevering and doesn't stop. It said the only difference between them and us is that they kept on trying. Precisely, they had believed that the revision and editing of sinner into saint is done not by man's pen, but by God's grace. Every time, we take it up onto our own hands, it can't work. It doesn't work. How does it work? All through God's grace. All through God's grace is He able to renew things, revitalize a new person, bring that love in their heart, right? So we're gonna see Saint Augustine. He was brilliant, he was poetic, he had honors, and he was professor of rhetoric. And he was from Carthage, which is the coast of Africa. And he was born in the year 354 in North Africa, somewhere by North Africa. And Shakespeare and him shared the same things on religion and philosophical significance in their life. Shakespeare, was able to relate with St. Augustine. That's crazy. So, Paul, it said during his times he was the greatest of all writers through his book, The Confessions. And he had a friend named Alypius, a friend. This friend, Alypius, becomes I believe, a person in this life that follows him, that's going to help him. And he didn't understand St. Augustine. He said, well, I have this love for women. But he'd go back and forth with marriage, St. Augustine, and his friends were like, well, why are you making your life so difficult? Why don't you just marry again? And he said, no, I can't go back to the way I was living. I can't go back to that way I was living. So his friends, although to him he sounded crazy, he said, all right, I respect what you believe in. If it's celibacy is what you want to live in, then by any means live in it. And although he could not understand, he respected it. So then his friend, same thing with his friend. At this time, St. Augustine was a professor. So then Alypius takes him to the gladiator show, where they kill each other. So they forced them in there. And he said St. Augustine didn't want to see. He had his eyes closed. He didn't want to see. So he kept his eyes closed, but he could only take so much where he opened his eyes, and this lust for blood, devoured him. It said this meant quite simply that he was given up to bloodlust. For these shows involved the brutalization and slaughter of helpless men and beasts. They were helpless men, maybe even innocent, and they had them in there fighting for their lives. And it said, when he was a mature man, his friends one day hauled them to the Colosseum by sheer force. Though he covered his eyes again, A mighty cry of the people beating strongly upon him, he opened his eyes, and the love of cruelty flamed up in him again. So soon as he saw the blood, he at the very instant drunk down a kind of savageness. You know, as soon as he opened his eyes, this lust of blood devoured him. You know, and how many times can we open up our eyes to something we shouldn't be opening up our eyes to, and it devours us, you know, to the sin, to the vices. Saint Augustine gives a perfect example how he admitted, like, yes, this devoured me. It took me. Continue. We're gonna continue. What happens to him? How his mother and how his parents were, who they were, and what they came to be. It says, his father, his name was Patricius, owner of a small estate. Later on, his father dies, and his mother Monica. He speaks highly about his mother. He says she was a firm Christian, ardent in devotion, a mom of self-control, a mom of good sense and worldly wisdom. You know, she was pretty much a devout Christian, you know, praying. But after the father died, it's like they were struggling a little bit. The mother was struggling. And they had 3 kids. So it was, you know, the necessary means were starting to become a little bit difficult. So as a child, before his father died, he accepted his mother's faith. But as he grew up, he accepted his father's paganism. His father was a bit pagan from what the book describes. But it says as a child, he accepted the faith. But as he was growing up, like how we all grow up and become a little bit rebellious, he accepted that paganism. He said, you know what, this side is more pleasurable to me, you know? So that's where this began. We see where the mom knows something about him growing up. There's 2 instances where he mentions in the book of Confessions where 2 things happens that his mom did. But for now, that's where we're going to leave off. So I said at the adolescence, he accepts the paganism. He said, yes, I am writing with paganism. So we continue. He marries a slave. There was probably some legal impediment. She had been a manumitted slave and therefore forbidden by law to marry a man of superior legal status. You know, sometimes we give in to our weaknesses. Sometimes we just like what we see and we give in. But God has a plan. God always has a plan in the midst of all this, in the midst of our mistakes, in the midst of us getting off track. He has a plan for all of this. But he has a child with this woman, and they have a kid. And they named the kid Adeodatus, meaning given by God. So then he has his lady, he has his kid, but he's still searching for God and you know, subconsciously still looking for God. So he accepts this religion of Manichaeism, which is good and bad, somewhere among the lines like that. And it's led by Mani, a so-called prophet Mani. And from what this book describes too, it was like a Persian fairy tale. And this was well below Agustin's intellectual level. And he was this for 9 years. Imagine, he's in his 20s. You know, he's in his 20s. In his 20s, we're all just trying to find what we're going to do the day of tomorrow. We're all trying to find ourselves. You know, we're all trying to make something of ourselves. So it says in his years of 20, he didn't know what to do. It said he didn't know what to do. Nothing, at those 20s, nothing was achieved yet. So at this time, everything was going bad. And he said, you know what, I need to make a change. I have to make a change. He said, I'm going to leave, you know, I'm going to head out. He was growing a concern of, you know what, this religion is not good for me. So then he leaves it. He says the 2 instances with the mother. Religion of mechanism. So then he's starting to grow weary. The doubt, you know, this doubt. He meets this Bishop Faustus, but he still finds him a bit silly. So although he's rejecting all these things, and he even went secticism, and who held the human mind is incapable of inquiring into the nature of things. That all one can do is to fold one's philosophical hands and cultivate blindness, but the attempt was vain. You know, he tried, but it was vain. So he wasn't feeling him. He wasn't getting what his soul needed. Although he was rejecting all these things, he still wasn't Christian. So he decides to leave, right? He decides to leave and separate himself from the situation. He needed to leave at a Carthage and said, you know what? I'm going to Rome. I'm going to take my lady, I'm going to take my son, and we're going to Rome because we need to have a different environment. He was conscious that I need to separate myself from here before I go crazy. You know, same thing with all of us. Sometimes we need to separate ourselves, make drastic change to make, you know, those drastic. We need to make drastic steps to make drastic changes. You know, the more we give on, or the more we give in, the more God can work through us. So he said, I need to leave this environment. Same thing how, you know, everyone accepting the word of God has to leave. Same thing how I had to leave California to come over here to New Jersey, to separate myself from everything and have a close encounter with God. And we all can find that. So St. Augustine in this case had to do the same. He said, I need to leave. I can't be here no more. So then he takes his lady, his lady and his kid, and his mom's, no, don't leave. What are you doing? But the fact that she was so exaggerated about this is, convinced them more like, I have to leave. I have to separate myself from all of this because if I don't leave, I'm going to die here. My soul's going to perish. My soul's going to diminish and it's not going to be nothing out of it. So then he goes to Rome. And, he became ill. He became ill again. He wasn't what he expected to get. So then finally he gets this opportunity to be a professor of rhetoric again. But this happened through the same people he was affiliated with, through the mechanism, the Mechanianism. But he said, no, I can't do this no more. For it was obtained on the strength of recommendations from Mechanian friends who might have been less active in the matter had they known of Augustine's alienation from their faith. So they wouldn't have offered this opportunity if he knew he was already kind of separated, himself. So then he becomes a professor. He becomes a professor of rhetoric at Milan. But this was given to him by his Mechanianism friends. So he said, no, I can't do this no more. So finally he meets another saint, Saint Ambrose. At this time he was a governor of province, interpreter of the scriptures. He was inspired by him and said, you know what, I want to follow his footsteps. I'm trying to follow him. So, but in his book he says he was aware that he was busy, so he couldn't really attend to him how maybe St. Augustine wanted to. But his mom comes a year later to Rome and lets him know, hey, I'm a catechumen and I want to be baptized. I'm going to get baptized. So she gets, just imagine how a mother might feel. She was excited, how, same thing how our parents might feel when we make a drastic change, when we want to see God. They get excited that we're making this change, right? So his mother's excited, a new change is happening. And that his yes also changed the people around him. His friend Alopius and 8 or 9 of them said, we're going to follow you too. They dropped everything. They dropped everything. They had no money. They had no common house. So they said that we need someone to support us. So they found a rich man that was able to sponsor them. But St. Augustine said, you know what? I need a woman in my life. I need to have a woman in my life. I can't live this I can't live this certain life and not, I love women. I have to have my woman. So then another opportunity, appeared. So another idea came in, and it was, marrying a rich woman. If I marry a rich woman, she can support this, and I can give in to the needs that a man wants, And so his mom said, you know what? I have an idea. I'm gonna go find you a wife. That you can get married in the church, so you can continue with this life, right? So she finds him the mom goes and finds him a wife, and she's young. She's young. Apart from that, he still has his concubine, the lady he had a wife with, and they have a son. So the mother said, well, we're gonna send you off lady, and we're going to keep the son. And when she left, she said this relationship just wasn't anything. She was sent home to North Africa and proved what her relationship with Agustin had meant to her by taking a vow of celibacy. She wasn't playing when she was with St. Augustine. Although they weren't married through the church, she took him seriously. She took him seriously, and after they sent her home, she said she took a vow of celibacy. This is interesting because that reflects on St. Augustine after. It reflects on she was able to do that and take that, and how that reflects on St. Augustine. Although St. Augustine wanted a woman, so this happens. And after a year later, the son dies. The son dies, and at this time, they were like, how twisted and confused were all the people in this group at this time. That can be judged from examination of Monica's motive. They were like, what? They're probably like tripping, like, what's going on? Why is all this why are you sending your wife? The kid, he dies, the kid then dies, the mother trying to set you up with a young girl, but he can't get married to the young girl still because she's so young. So, and then this is where, it said, how was St. Augustine supposed to keep a celibacy with a girl so young? How was he going to live this life, right? So then this is where the two instances where he mentions too that, it said the mother saw what was going on with them, his sexual nature, and she said, well, why couldn't she marry me young? And the other was that when he was young too, it was already starting to become common in the Catholic Orthodox that they were baptizing the kids, and he was young and ill. And he said, mother, baptize me. But, for her reasons, she said, no, like, I don't want to baptize you. I don't want to do that. So, that's what happened with the wife. And that's what happened to him. It said when his wife left, they were married for 14 years. When his wife left, he said, my heart cleaving unto her was broken. By this means and wounded, and blood drawn from me. He felt great pain when she had to leave. That was his wife. That was his lady. That was his partner. It gets weary. It gets black. It gets bad. It gets very bad in his life. It's like, well, what's going on? Like the wife, the mom, the kid, the son, like all these things were going on. His group of friends were like, what's going on in here? And then finally, his friend Alopius, he's going through it too. So he stands up and some scriptures fall. And someone, it said a child in a neighborhood said, take up and read. Take up and read. And it said the chant kept on going. So then St. Augustine saw this as a sign. So then he picked it up, and it was St. Paul to the Romans. It said, not in rioting, not in drunkenness, not in chambering and impurities, not in contention and envy, but put ye on the Lord Jesus Christ, and make not provision for the flesh and his concupiscence. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. It's like, don't pay attention to what the body wants, not in drunkenness, not in what the body needs, not in what the body wants, but look for what the soul is asking you. So this illuminated him, this grabbed him by the soul, and I said, look, Alopius, look, I found it. And through that, his friend found his vocation too. It said, now him that is weak in faith, take unto you. And he applied it to himself and announced that he would follow Augustine into the church. When you have that spirit with you, it's contagious to the other person. So we see how the word of God penetrates. Once you read it, it doesn't come back empty. It's going to stay. It's going to work. It's going to work its wonder. It's going to work its wondrous deeds, So his friend gets illuminated. Augustine gets illuminated. Finally, in Easter, he gets baptized. It says, in Easter, he Adeodatus and Alypius were baptized at Milan by St. Ambrose. They were baptized. It said Adeodatus, his son too, before he passed away. So they got baptized there by the saint. Finally, there is St. Augustine with his mom. They're in a garden in the courtyard, and it said they talked of the love of God and were raised to a moment's understanding of him. And while we were thus talking of his wisdom and panting for it, with all the effort of our hearts, we did for one instant attain touch it. The mom and the son got in ecstasy. They said for one instant, we were able to attain it and touch it. Then Augustin then says, then sighing and leaving the first fruits of our spirit bound to it, we return to the sound of our own tongue. They had to come back to earth eventually. But we see how when we seek for God, when we have those sincere, authentic, when we have those moments with the Lord, he'll give us gifts like this. And after this, the mother said, okay. Monica, the mom, felt that she had no need further of life. And indeed, it was only a few days before she died. St. Francis, me and the brother Max would say, or we're talking about the other day, how St. Francis craved heaven so much. Brother Sam mentioned this too. How St. Francis craved heaven so much that his body was decomposing. Same thing here. How the mom fulfilled her mission here. She was okay with, my son knows God already. We entered this ecstasy, this understanding of what God is, of God's love. And she passed away. So finally, at this time they needed priests. The things were going bad. And he was kidnapped and made into a presbyter and later a bishop. And then he says, when he said that he knew God, it must be accepted that something really happened, which his perceptions and his intellect interpreted as the knowledge of God. And none of us can claim perception as delicate or as intellect as strong. Have that close relationship with God, so no one can take that away from you. That's St. Augustine. I hope we can learn something from him today and ask for his intercession. Thank you. This is Andy, this is Brother Andy coming at you. And enjoy your day.